I'm gonna give another spicy take here. I don't really cringe that much at the Happy Birthday, Mr. President. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Serialized. I'm Kino, joined again by Stephanie from Soprano Blueprints as we continue our discussion of the series. How you doing today, Stephanie?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing quite well. We're going to be talking about season 5 of this show, which I've never been 100% sure, but I think that most fans, this is one of the lower seasons of the show. I think people rank it towards the bottom. I think they rank the other seasons higher than this. Where does it fall for you?
So I happen to really like season 5, and I think it depends really because there are people that I've heard from who really like season 5 isn't their thing, particularly Tony B. I feel like some people, they either like him or they really don't like him. For me, I'd say it's probably like my third favorite season. I really like, the addition of Phil, of course, Beach, Tony B, and of course more Lupertazzi drama, but there are different views and some people season 5 really isn't their thing.
I don't dislike season 5, but I think that it's more of like a filler season for me. Like it's setting up a bunch of stuff that's really going to pay off in the next 2 seasons here, which season 6 we're going to talk about separately, but we'll talk about it as we go through it. But I don't dislike Tony Blendetto or season 5, but we'll just jump into it here with the first episode, Two Tonys, which I think is a very strong episode. I think that naturally that title leads you to think of like the two different Tonys, of Tony Blendetto and Tony Soprano. But Tony Blendetto is not in this episode. He's going to get out of prison next episode. So what the two Tonys that we're really dealing with here are the two different sides of Tony Soprano himself.
Yeah, and I like how he says that explicitly to Dr. Melfi. They're two Tony Sopranos. But then it's funny because then it also the next episode, then of course you think of Tony Uncle Johnny and Tony Uncle Al. So you then come back to the two Tonys expression. But yeah, I like how they have it expressed there.
We see a different side to Tony in this episode, a side that's actually pretty pathetic. In this episode, he's going after Dr. Melfi. He decides he wants to be in a relationship with her now that he's not with Carmela anymore. And he does a lot of weird moves. The first of which is he compares them to the movie The Prince of Tides, which I've only read the Wikipedia summary of it, but it's about a guy kind of falling in love with his therapist. But I always thought it was kind of weird because if you actually read the plot of what happens in the movie, I don't think Tony would want to compare himself to the main character who goes through some very dark stuff in the movie.
Yeah, I think with Tony, it's more I think it's where he wants to believe that he can be the sort of idealized version of himself. But I think it's similar to back in season 1 when all of a sudden he was like, I'm in love with you. I think he's sort of just acting out. I don't think he would actually really know how to react if Dr. Melfi was like, okay, yeah, let's all go away with you. And I think that I think it's more almost like a rebound sort of thing, or him just sort of acting out from not really being able to properly process his feelings on Carmela. I think, and I think Dr. Melfi sees that clearly.
And I think that there's a really telling moment that when Melfi rejects him, which again, he usually comes off so confident with women and so assertive, but with Melfi especially, he kind of, it was almost like he was scared, like a little boy almost with her. But when she rejects him, it's telling that his first move is to go back to Carmela, even though in this episode he's kind of like, oh, I'm done with Carmela, like I'm glad I'm away from her finally. But the first kind of rejection he gets, he goes back to the familiar territory, which is he goes back to the house and sits outside there. So it's very telling of their relationship.
Oh, absolutely. And then you just made me think when you mentioned outside, of course, makes me think of the bear.
Yes, that's going to be a thing this season.
Which I know there's, first the bear Tony parallels. But yeah, he likes to sort of come back and mark his territory, even as, like leaving his bathing suit, in the kitchen, like little things like that he likes to, when things aren't working out in other realms, he likes to sort of come back to his nest.
Yes. And in this episode, we also have Christopher having a fight with Paulie over the money. Again, a funny storyline, but this conflict between the two of them It's something that's going to keep building, and it's going to have ramifications for both of their characters here. But I love the detail that they decide to split the original tab, the 1,200 that Christopher pays at dinner. I always thought it was funny that they agree to split that, even though it's all Christopher's money. Like Paulie found a way to like get half of it, basically.
Right. Yeah. And I think another that is interesting, and it was a really shitty thing of them to do. So on another note, but also detail wise, something that to me sticks out about the season 5 opener is the fact that we have Meadow driving up the driveway and like running over the newspaper, as opposed to what we're so used to seeing, which is Tony going down the
Yeah,
drive.
it's the opening without Tony. Like you feel his absence.
Yeah, and I feel like even, because versus, Tony going and getting the paper and picking it up, and now it's like, oh, no one's getting it. Meadows just kind of rolling over it.
Yeah, that's something we haven't really talked about this whole time. We probably should have, but each season opens with Tony going to get the paper. It starts in the pilot, and every season they open with that again. And usually something happens during that that kind of sets the tone. Like in season 2, that's when we get Big Pussy comes back. Season 4 dealing with kind of the world destruction. Yeah, this one he's not there, and it's even going to continue next season too. So it's a nice like little thematic touch to kind of start off each season.
Hmm.
Yeah, but moving on to episode 2 here, Rat Pack. The first episode written by Matthew Weiner, who joined the writing cast this season and has a little cameo in it too. And he'll, even though he's only in the show for the last 3 seasons of it, he, like Terrence Winter, became one of the most successful writers from the show.
Yeah, with Matt went on to write Mad Men, which I heard he wrote like totally immersed himself in like that the '60s period of time, and then he's been like 7 years writing the script or something like.
Yeah, his pilot was basically legendary. He shopped it around everywhere. HBO, David Chase recommended that HBO pick up the pilot, but between you and me, there might have been some reasons that they didn't like Matt Weiner personally. I'm working on a big Mad Men retrospective right now, so
Oh yeah, I saw the pilot that you posted, the pilot one.
yeah, basically immersing myself in the whole story of the entire series itself. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack there. But he obviously did a really great job on on the Sopranos. Like there's some people who don't really like his episodes, which we'll talk about when we get to the test stream. But I think he did a really good job, and he's definitely a different writer than Terrence. I think if you compare their two shows, their Mad Men and Boardwalk Empire, they're very different shows, but they're both very good in their own ways.
Yeah, I could see that. And yeah, they both have a different specific flavor, but I think, yeah, for Sopranos fans, I think there's something to love in both of them.
And this is obviously the first introduction of Tony B. He joins the cast here, and he's going to be obviously the main part of this season here. What do you think about Tony Blundetto? Because this is one of those characters that you really either love him or you hate him.
So it was funny 'cause the first movie or film that I saw Steve Buscemi in was in Armageddon, like when I was really little. So I think when I first watched, I was like I think it took me a couple times to really like see him as this Tony B character. But I like him. I wouldn't say he's my favorite character, but I think that he adds a lot to season 5, just in terms of his story and some of his parallels and contrasts, not just with Tony, but also with other characters like Artie or Feach. And I think there's sort of a lot of things that about him that force Tony to sort of dig deeper, and we learn more about Tony's vulnerabilities. But I mean, I won't say he's my favorite though. I don't mean to try to sidestep the question. I just say I like him. I wouldn't say he's my favorite, but I don't dislike him. What about you?
So I did a whole video on him where I think the problem with him, and one of the reasons he doesn't work as well as he could have, is because his storyline was originally supposed to be over 2 seasons. They hired Steve Buscemi to be on season 5 and season 6. However, they kind of wrote themselves into a corner and had to kill him off at the end of season 5, which I think kind of hurts his storyline. It makes it feel a little bit rushed. Like I see where they were trying to go with a guy trying to go straight, but then being led back into the life. But instead of that kind of playing out naturally over, 2 different seasons, It feels like he kind of like goes back and forth throughout the season. He doesn't feel quite as genuine as some of the other characters. So I definitely agree with you. He's integral to Tony's story. We learn a lot about Tony through Tony Blendetto, but as a character on his own, he doesn't work as well as he probably should have.
Yeah, I do think the whole bag on the side of the road thing was kind of ran. I wonder if that was at the point where they like realized they were going to not have him for two different seasons, because it did seem like sort of a very like all of a sudden like that's going to be your downfall. We're going to have a, bag of cash.
Do you think that was from Tony? Because there's a lot of people who are like, oh, Tony basically like seduced him back into the life by giving him this money that was going to lead him down the wrong path.
It's possible. Obviously, anything's possible, but I think the timing. I mean, that would be. It's almost like to suggest that they were just sort of on the lookout, like kind of like parked up, like waiting for the particular time when Tony and his girlfriend were going to be, walking down the street for then someone to drive by. I mean, it's possible. Obviously, detectives, spend all day sitting on the street waiting for someone to come, but it's possible. Anything's possible, but it's hard for me to. I guess I feel like I would need more evidence.
I don't buy it. Like, we don't have any sort of like confirmation of Tony doing it later, like no him talking with the guy or paying him off or something. It's too much like in the background. I think it was just supposed to be like a hand of fate type thing. I think he even talked in the video that the episode director said it was supposed to be like the hand of fate basically helping him. So yeah, I don't really buy it. But again, like you said, that's one of the things that does it. It feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere, and again leads to Tony not being super believable. But the other storyline in this episode is Adriana again dealing with the guilt of being an informant, and I love how she does the thing that a lot of characters do, which is instead of actually addressing it, she kind of turns it on someone else, which is she rats out her friend Tina, who, fun fact for those who didn't know, she was the girlfriend of Mustang Sally, who back in season 3, they brought her back. I just thought it was really cool that she was friends with Adriana, but then Adriana rats her out as revenge for flirting with Christopher, and also to kind of make herself feel better about being an informant, which is very much something like Tony would do in this situation.
Absolutely. I could see Tony. That would be his way of making himself feel better. Like, oh, I'm doing the right thing because at least I did this. I don't blame Adrian. To be honest, I thought that she had a lot of nerve, and I thought Christopher had a lot of nerve too. To be frank, for how they were sort of flirting right in front of Adriana.
Well, I mean, Christopher's done a lot worse than that. I remember when he put his hand on Danielle. Yeah, so he's not a guy who's gonna keep it in his pants. But yeah, Tina, yeah, she gets ratted out in this episode. And again, I thought that was interesting that they took Adriana, who is this very innocent character, and they gave her some edge here, where it's like, yeah, she's gonna do the quote unquote wrong thing. I mean, she did the legal thing, but she did kind of the wrong thing morally to just kind of make herself feel better, which we see all the time.
And then this also leads, also to Jack Masserone in terms of other rats that are part of the rat pack from this episode.
And not to mention Ray Curto, who never gets revealed for the rat he is. And I have a whole video about how basically all the captains were rats.
And they were all largely ineffective as well.
Well, we see them like building up this case for like 6 years, but these informants keep dying on them. But, moving on to the next episode here, Where's Johnny? We have Junior's dementia, which has been building for a while. He was faking it for a little while, but it's almost like art imitating life. Like he actually developed the dementia he was pretending to have. But we're really seeing it full force here when he kind of wanders out of the house and is looking for his brother.
Yeah, I thought he almost he jinxed himself. He wanted to get out of jail on a medical and wanted to make himself look like he was so ill. I think he almost is like his karma in a way. It's like, oh, you want to be out on a medical? Okay, you're going to go get dementia now and cancer, among other things.
Well, it's interesting that the doctor tells him it's like the mind-body connection, and that's what ends up happening again. I don't think it was just that. I think he is also, getting old, and maybe the falling and hitting his head in the courthouse steps. All this, and also living alone probably is not good for his mental health either. But all these things are just kind of leading him down this sad path. But it was a very touching scene between Tony, who again, the whole varsity athlete thing is kind of a meme, but it does really hurt Tony's feelings. And at the end here, when he's reconnecting with Junior and basically being like, "Don't you love me?" It's a very touching emotional scene
Yeah,
between the two.
definitely. Even the music in the background, kind of very just eerie and sad.
And in this episode, we also have the war between Johnny Sack and Little Carmine starting to form as they are both setting up to become the new boss, and that's obviously going to be a big plot element
Yep,
this season.
Lady Shylock, and then of course Sal Vitro is another.
So poor Sal gets half his root, gets less than 1,000. Like Paulie keeps some of the money he was supposed to give to Sal, and then he has to do all these lawns for free on top of it. It's yeah, this is a prime example of like. Well, I was gonna say this is a prime example of don't get involved with the mob, but he didn't even get involved with the mob. The mob got involved with him out of nowhere. Like he didn't ask Paulie.
And then it's because Speech comes up to him and says, "My nephew does this lawn and there's lawns in this area," even though he literally been doing the neighborhoods for 26 years. That's was one of Speech's like things right away. Like he overstepped so much right away.
Well, I think it. I mean, we'll talk about this next episode because this is with Feach. But I think that Feach is doing the same thing the other guys are doing. It's just that he's been away for a while and they don't like him encroaching on their turf. But they all do this stuff. They all like take advantage of people. And but we'll move on to All Happy Families because this is the one that kind of deals with that. This one was actually written by Tony Kalem, who plays Angie. It's kind of cool she got to write an episode here. I think this might be the only one
Yeah, I
she
think it's
writes, but
only. I thought it was really cool too.
yeah, and it's very what's the word, intellectual. Like there's a lot of references to literature in this one. Obviously, the title is a reference to Tolstoy, I believe. And then in the episode, Carmela is talking with the counselor about Madame Bovary, which is another literary
I love
reference.
that,
So
in terms of, I think that Carmela is like almost a Madame Bovary, like just with the way that Mr. Wegler talks about it, and also the way he describes the book, it kind of reminds me of The Sopranos.
yeah, that is kind of funny. But I think it was also funny that like again, this is only I've only read the Wikipedia, so if I'm a pleb, I'm sorry. But again, I don't think being compared to Madame Bovary is a good thing. I don't think Carmela, if she knew what it was about, she would feel flattered. But it's funny that like again, just so we talked about the Prince of Tides, the kind of comparisons they make to media and literature and stuff that doesn't often it's not as actually flattering as it kind of first
Right,
appears.
right, definitely. I wonder if Carmela, when she read it, if she recognized any of it in herself, or if she was sort of like, in denial. But yeah, it's interesting how they bring in the literary references, even like Billy Budd last season too.
But we have, more stuff than that going on. We've got Carmela dealing with AJ, him, going off on his own to this concert and then going to live with Tony afterwards. I think this is one of the reasons why people really don't like AJ because of just how shitty he is to his mother. And a lot of people are like, man, how could a kid be this selfish? But I think it's pretty natural that a lot of kids are sort of like this with their parents, and we might not like to admit it, but there's a lot of times where you're kind of an ingrate or insensitive to your parents, trying their best, provide for you and take care of you.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, when I really don't like the way that AJ talked to Carmela in this episode, but yeah, at the same time, when I was a teenager, I've certainly been a brat and said nasty things. So I can't finger point and say, "Oh, you're so horrible," because I mean, I we think we've all been like that at some point with our parents.
We've all been there. And, the other thing in this episode is Feach, like we talked about. They send him away back to prison, which is honestly probably a worse fate than death, that he's gonna die there now as an old man. But I thought it was interesting that one of the reasons why Tony gets rid of him is not just that he's causing problems like this, it's the fact that he didn't laugh at the joke. And Carmela made a point that like all the people laugh at his joke because they're afraid of him, they're not really his friends. And while he's insulted by that, he sees that Feach doesn't laugh at the joke, and so Feach is not scared of Tony, and he realizes that like, oh, this guy is going to be a problem like Richie Aprile, and that's one of the reasons why
Oh,
he
yeah,
gets rid of him.
definitely. I think, and Feach even he says, you gotta, remember, Tony, I still think of you as a kid. So it's like, you don't, you're not scared of me. You still think of me as a kid. You've already sort of overstepped multiple times. I feel like Tony, but I guess in Tony's head, death is like the worst thing for him, or in his head anyway, like theoretically. So I think he thought he was sort of doing Peach a favor. But yeah, I think at this point, especially having gotten a taste of freedom, now going back.
There's an interesting connection here where the parole officer they reference him later, the same parole officer when Christopher's telling or when Christopher's telling Tony Blundetto like, hey, if your parole officer is being hard on you, call our guy. Again, kind of referencing that this was their guy that got him sent back. So again, look at a lot of good cross episode
And
connections
just
here.
shows the depth of their reach, like into the system.
Moving on to the next episode here, Irregular Around the Margins. We have a storyline dealing with Tony and Adriana, who really have not had any sort of significant interaction throughout the rest of the show. But of course, the second that Tony kind of gets alone with a beautiful woman, his natural instincts like take over.
Yeah, and then her sort of instructions from the FBI to get information. I feel like she was excited too, and I think that she also missed. I think she also enjoyed flirting with him too. You know, she liked, I think, having the attention, because it's not like Christopher was exactly like extremely affectionate with her, extremely attentive. So I think she honestly liked the attention.
I think so too, and I think that it's sort of cliche, but he's sort of a father figure to her. She doesn't have a father, as we know throughout the show, and him being in this position for her is very comforting at a time where she's struggling with all this stuff. She can't talk to Christopher about it, being an informant, dealing with her health issues, all this sort of stuff. So I think it's sort of natural she feels this sort of attraction to Tony, that he's like a safe figure, like a figure that would kind of protect her a little bit, even though they don't go anywhere obviously with it because they crash. Who knows where it would have led to later on. But again, this whole game of telephone that they all do, where they keep exaggerating the story, very much like a thing they do on the show, where these guys are again act like school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's like when Ralph did the prank call to New Chico Theory. It's like that's we got a firsthand look at the grapevine in their world.
Yeah, again, it's funny how they have to deal with all this stuff just for appearance's sake, where Tony has to go back to Carmela, and I love her line where she's like, "It never ends, your shit." Like even when they're separated, she still has to be like cleaning up his mess no matter what. And again, she does it, which I think is foreshadowing for the fact that they're going to get back together here. But again, it's so funny that he has to involve her, like, please come to dinner with me just so everyone's clear.
Yeah, to like show face.
Yeah, but moving into the next episode here, Sentimental Education, directed by Peter Bogdanovich, who plays Elliot, the Melfi's personal therapist, and a great director in his own right. But we have Carmela and Robert Wagler, which it's very interesting that this is the first man in the entire series besides Tony she ever sleeps with. She had her flirtations with Father Phil and the other guy, but this is the first one she actually pulls the trigger on and goes for.
Yeah, I think she also liked the attention. I think she felt like that she was young again. Like even sort of the whole like sneaking in and out of the house. I felt like she was almost back in high school and sort of experiencing that thrill again.
I've said this before, that the type of man that Carmela goes for outside of Tony, it's not really the strong alpha male types. She goes for guys who have like a sensitivity to them, like Father Phil. Like she even says in this one that kind of like a backhanded compliment where she's like, I kind of thought he was gay. He reminded me of you. But again, she likes the more sensitive guys, because that's the one thing she really doesn't get from Tony is the sensitivity.
Back in season 2 to Nick Moose's sister, I sensed there was a sadness about him.
Yeah, she really liked, again, the same thing with Furia. They kind of had this like emotional thing, but again, she's searching for more so the emotional rather than just like a strong, tough guy like Tony.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And then Tony B in this episode we see him kind of self-destruct here, where his life is going on the right path. Like he's got his business starting, he's got a girlfriend who kind of comes out of nowhere. Again, this is one of those things where it's like, oh, he's got a longtime girlfriend, I guess, from prison that he met, but it kind of all falls apart the second he gets a taste of the life, which again, we've seen that happen with a lot of these
Yeah, he
characters.
did. He had a very low tolerance for frustration. Even with it, he got so annoyed with the fact that the chairs had been delivered somewhere else, and it's annoying. But I mean, that's just kind of a sort of the cost of doing business. And I'm not surprised, given that he got barely an hour of sleep and went straight, basically from his card game to work. I think he was trying to have everything, but that wasn't going to be compatible for what him running a business.
Yeah, and we'll see that there's other stuff that pushes him along this path, like his children, his two sons that wanting to provide for them, the kind of jealousy that he's not really acknowledged yet that he feels for Tony. So it's more than just this, but again, this episode's one of those reasons why I think people don't like his storyline, because just like this comes out of nowhere, everything was going great, now he's suddenly being an asshole. And I just think that if they'd kind of slow rolled it a little bit more, it might have been a little more believable.
Right. But the only thing I will say is that I guess it's also, possible for someone, if they're reintegrating into society, they could also, I guess, things could be going very, very well. But then I guess, once if there are roadblocks, and sometimes I think they can also then easily stumble. Might have been the case here. And I think also Tony sort of, I don't want to say jealous, but almost just like how he didn't really want Janice to have success with her anger management. I also feel like he didn't really want Tony B to be successful, sort of going down the straight path. Because then I feel like he would have less of an excuse to not go down the same path.
Oh, I agree 100%. Like Tony hated seeing other people better themselves, which is sort of why I mean I could believe that maybe he sabotaged him, but again, I don't necessarily believe the money thing. But yeah, he definitely did not fully support, Tony B going straight. Yes, he got him the job and everything like that, but it was kind of clear he was only okay helping people as long as it didn't make him feel bad personally.
Yeah, and he was happy then when at the end when Tony B's like, "Oh, things didn't work out," and he's like, "It's hard." I mean,
He's got a smug, satisfied face on. It's like, yeah, I knew it. Like I knew you
yeah, it's
could.
hard doing business with strangers.
In fact, he might even have the exact same look that he had when Janice snapped at him, where he's like, "Yeah, I knew it. I knew you weren't really changed." I'll have to go back and look at that sometime, but the faces are probably
Yeah,
similar
definitely
there.
that group.
But moving into In Camelot, again, an episode that some people absolutely hate. I'm gonna give another spicy take here. I don't really cringe that much at the "Happy Birthday, Mr. President."
I don't see anything wrong with that. I know what you mean about being a spicy take though, because I think probably at least 95% of people feel the same way. I don't like her at all. I thought that when she didn't really care to hear anything of what like Tony was talking about at the dinner, I kind of she rubbed me the wrong way sort of from the beginning. But I do like this episode because I think a lot of interesting things and very enlightening things occur that we see in terms of sort of Livia's backstory and sort of where some of her really like emotional insecurities with regard to Johnny and also just people in general because her son also lied to her face, and then also with the whole Rock the Casbah drive that I love that scene between Tom and Phil.
Oh, that's a great scene. I think In Camelot is honestly one of the best episodes of the series. Like, I know some people are gonna hate that, but man, the storyline with Livia, I thought was one of the most powerful they've done about making this character who you hate throughout most of the show. You kind of understand, like, oh, I sort of get why she hates Tony because, you can make any excuses you want that he was a kid or whatever, but he sided with the dad in this horribly traumatic moment that she goes through. And it's like, I could see why she would be like, oh, you're just like your father here. You're a piece of shit. And I thought they did a great job with her character here. Like I said, I think people very much over exaggerate like how cringy the Fran Felstein thing is. It's like, was it cringy? Sure. But like some people like, I can't even watch this episode because of that. And I'm like, dude, get over it. Like some elements of a show are meant to make you uncomfortable.
I can think of many more gruesome, cringy scenes on this show and many other shows that. I mean, I get it. It doesn't appeal to me, but I think that it's also it's part of she's part of what that whole sort of storyline is about because she was also very selfish. Like, oh, the lamb chops were getting cold when he was on the phone with Tony and he'd just been told that Livy's at the hospital. So I feel like they wanted her to be cringy. They wanted her to be like that to show.
Yeah, and again, I think that like at the ending here where Tony, Tony's realizes how shitty his dad was, basically like leaving the mother to have a miscarriage like that while he's with his mistress and not even coming back till the next day. But at the end of the episode, he decides to side with his dad again. He tells the story about his dad and her and JFK and all that stuff. He's like glamorizing it. The title In Camelot is a reference to Camelot, how they describe JFK's administration. It's this very idealized romantic version of the events. And just like that, Tony's romanticizing his dad, putting down his mother, and he's choosing to believe the more kind of beautiful lie about his childhood rather than the ugly truth that his dad was kind of a piece of shit. And, as bad as Olivia was, she had some reasons to be very resentful of
Right.
family.
And I think that Tony sees himself and his father a little bit. So that's why I think he, gets this sort of defensive posture because, just like how he has, Gumar's. And so I think that's why he sort of then went backwards and then ended up, blaming his stuff on Libya because he almost, it feels like admitting that how badly Johnny Boy had treated her. Then it's like almost him admitting how badly he treated Carmilla or how bad of a husband he's been at certain point.
I will say the one thing that they introduced JT Dolan this episode, and I feel like I like JT, don't get me wrong, but I feel like more so than being like a real character, he's there as like sort of a punching bag for the writers to kind of make fun of writers. Like it's clear they wanted to kind of mock screenwriters and stuff like that with this character, maybe kind of like a self-deprecating way. But I never felt that JT was fully believable as a character. He was just kind of there for them to have like a television screenwriter character to basically make fun of and use as a punching bag, as a fun thing for the writers to do rather than JT being like a real serious
character. Yeah, I loved what he was trying to pawn his I liked how they had this.
Yeah, and that guy wouldn't take it. Yeah, very, very much a tongue-in-cheek, like mocking of their industry.
Actually, almost like in some ways, like an alternate version of Christopher, in the sense of like, I mean, they both had their diction issues. Christopher had also wanted to be, a screenwriter. Obviously, that didn't work out, and JT, it also sort of, yeah, he moved up sort of in his industry, and then of course he had his relapses back and forth with the different addictions, but yeah, I feel like he and Christopher had some similarities. Obviously, I think he's a little smarter than Christopher in terms of like book smart or writing wise. I think it was just interesting how they had him way there at the end become basically an unintended or almost like collateral damage from Christopher from his demons.
Yeah, Christopher definitely uses him the same way that like Tony uses some of his friends. So there's definitely some. It's part of Christopher's journey there, but as a character on his own, I don't think JT really stands that.
Oh yeah,
strong.
definitely. I mean, I think his character could be replaceable. It's not like something where it's like only James Gandolfini could be Tony Soprano, or like there could be another person playing JT Dolan.
Which is odd though, because the guy who plays him, Tim Daly, was actually the star of David Chase's first show, Almost Grown. Like he was the main character. So you would think that like David would have like, oh, this is the first guy I ever worked with. Might have given him like a stronger role, but instead they kind of made the character more of a joke. I'm not sure if maybe David Chase had some personal animosity against it. I don't think so. It's clear they continue to work together like this. And they referenced Tim Daly back in season 3. The Noah's dad was kind of making fun of him. So again, I don't know if maybe David Chase has some sort of like likes to use Tim as a punching bag or something. But
yeah, I remember him. Yeah, at their dinner, I remember.
The next episode, Marco Polo here, dealing with Carmela's dad's birthday. I thought it was very nice how much like Hugh really liked his son-in-law. He loved Tony. Wanted him to be there even though they're getting divorced. Hugh's not around a long time in the series, but you do genuinely get to feel his character, that he's like this mostly like repressed guy whose wife kind of nags him, but he does genuinely kind of love Tony and loves having him as a son, basically.
Yeah, it was a very like sort of heartwarming episode. It was sort of also like a little an oasis in the middle of this season that had been otherwise getting pretty kind of violent. And of course, at the end of the episode, when Tony B kills Joey Peeps, it gets violent again. But it was almost, yeah, it was just like a nice moment of coming together despite all the other bullshit. And it felt like, yeah, it felt like a genuinely family.
And we have Tony and Carmela hooking up again. Again, we're seeing that no matter what has happened between the two, there's this like deep love and attraction that they have that is one of the reasons they can't really ever escape each other. Is they naturally, when things are going wrong, turn towards each other and want to be with each other like that. We'll see that again in the test stream. But I thought that was a nice moment too of like, oh, you see the attraction between these two
Oh yeah, yeah,
characters.
definitely. And I think Edie Falco's talked about too. That's just the extraordinary chemistry that they had when they were working together. I think it's also I think it's also something that triggers Tony B. Sort of how the way that Tony acts at the party, where he sort of gets all really close and affectionate with Meadow. Feel like he's almost like rubbing it in his face, like, oh, you don't know where your daughter is. And it might even not even be something that Tony's fully conscious of, but something that, I can feel like the tension in the air.
Yeah, and it is interesting the whole fact that Tony did not really take care of Tony Blendetto's family. Again, you can excuse that for the fact that we have to acknowledge that Tony Blendetto was not written ahead of time, that they didn't know before season 5 that this guy was a character, but it's clear like from the story itself that Tony did not look after this guy's family, which probably should have if this guy's supposed to be like your brother. We see other characters doing stuff like that, but I mean, it's clear Tony was like when Tony Blendetto was away, Tony kind of didn't really pay his family too much mind. So no matter what they say, like, oh yeah, you're my brother, or whatever, you're on your own when it comes to your family. But moving on to the next episode here, unidentified blackmails. Again, a strong episode in terms of like we learn a lot about Tony, his first panic attack, the guilt he feels over his cousin and how much that's influenced him. He gives him a reward, even though in his heart he knows that this guy, is screwing things up for the family. He just can't kind of confront the guilt that he feels over all this stuff. And it's a very psychological episode for Tony.
Definitely, yep. I think he really, almost has a panic attack himself in Dr. Melfi's office. And she kind of, she brings it out of him, and he really just sort of pours it all on her. And then also with this episode, we have the poverty of Mezzogiorno.
Well, Meadow and Finn. Well, I guess we should talk first about Finn having that whole thing with Vito, finding him, performing oral sex on the security guard. And this is, I think, the first introduction we get to the fact that Vito's gay. I don't think they've brought it up before this episode, but obviously that's going to be a big plot point next season as well. But I love how the fight between Finn and Meadow ends with them getting engaged. Like it's like they were yelling at each other, they were fighting all this stuff, and then in the heat of the argument, he proposes to her almost out of nowhere.
I think he literally he just proposed just so she could be quiet and he could go to sleep. But it's yeah, the whole thing with Vito, and then also how he freaks out about with Eugene. But I think it's just so ironic that Vito shows up early to his no work job and is giving someone a blow job in the parking lot. Like he shows up early for another job at his no work job.
That is funny. Actually, I never thought about that wordplay there, but yeah, this is going to be a thing that kind of defines the character moving forward. Vito's been kind of in the background for a lot of this, but once this element happens, like, okay, him being in the closet and all this stuff is going to be a main thing moving forward. But we also have Carmela and Tony fully getting ready to get divorced. It was funny. Carmela was willing to take Tony back after their sex. It was him that was just kind of like, it was a one time. Like he was so like casual about hooking up with her. If he had just kind of come back with like flowers or something like that, she would have taken it back in an instant, and he wouldn't have had to pay the $600,000 he has to do later on. It's like if he had shown an ounce of like affection, he could have got back in with that.
Right.
Sort
He
of
actually did
problems.
come in like the night when Carmela was with Gabby, and she thought that Tony was in there, come inside the house when he dropped AJ off. Like he could have just come inside the house. Like, yeah, it would have been a lot simpler than having to pay $600,000.
But I think he doesn't quite know yet that he wants to get back with her. Like he will understand that in the starting in the test stream, but he needs to kind of go through his psychological journey here to kind of realize that he needs to be with her no matter what. But yeah, we can move on to the next episode here too, Cold Cuts, which again, one of my favorite episodes in terms of like just showing how shitty Tony is to all the people around him. It's like he's shitty to Christopher in this episode. He's shitty to Georgie, and he's shitty to Janice, and he's just like his mother, just like a very negative
Yeah, like
person.
kind of a dark poisonous cloud. I really love the visuals in this episode, like when they're at the farm, especially. I think they have really great like visual moments also.
I love too that we're seeing like Christopher as like the little boy again, and we're seeing what it was like for him growing up with Tony and Tony Blundetto. And when they're alone together, there's like this deep bond between the two where it's like, yeah, it's like big brother, little brother. But the second they get together, they bring out like the worst in each other. And I know some people like to make fun of Chris. It's like, oh, you know, you're a murderer and stuff, crying in your car. But I think then, like, no matter what, these childhood traumas still hurt. Even when you're grown up, you still kind of feel like you did when you were a kid, and you feel picked on and stuff like that.
And they're kind of, it's just they're all sort of they're all hypocrites. Like when the three of them are at the table, they all have different things that they get really insulted by or that they take offense to, but they don't seem to really care when it's them insulting someone else or taking a dig at someone else and their issue.
And in terms of Janice going into, anger management therapy, there's some people who are like, oh, she was just faking it or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you control your anger, it doesn't matter whether it's like, it's all about the control. It's not about whether you mean it or not. If you're not blowing up on people, then congratulations, you have your anger under control.
Exactly. It's because it's faking it essentially. That in this case, faking it is would be making.
Yeah, you can't really fake like not being angry and exploding. It's like people don't care if you have the anger. It's just about whether you take it out on other people like Tony does. Like everyone has those emotions, but I thought that Janice acting the way she did was a good thing, no matter what, even if she was just doing it to try to make herself feel like a better person. At the end of the day, the people around her had a better life because of it, and that's what's the most important thing. So yeah, Tony doing that to her was extremely shitty. And the ending, I love the ending scene here where it's like, I'm not like everyone else, playing over the footage, which is very rare in the show. It's very telling about his character.
Definitely, yeah, that was just it was very strong way to end the episode.
Very, very solid emotional episode in this one. But the test stream, again, there's a lot of stuff this season that people don't like. And this is one of those episodes where either you love this episode or you hate it. So where do you fall on the
I'm
test
kind of one of
stream?
those people that falls, I guess, in the middle. I like the different like symbols and themes, and I like that every time you rewatch, there's something else to notice. I know a lot of people they either love or they either hate all of the sort of dream sequences. I liked it. Again, I wouldn't say it's my favorite episode. I liked a couple other season 5 episodes better than this one, but I don't feel like particular hatred for any specific one episode. Which I know some people do, but I liked it. I don't rewatch it so much, but I always learn something new whenever I do.
I really like this episode. I know people don't like the dream episodes. I think they're fun. I don't spend all my time analyzing every single facet of like, what does this mean? What does this mean? Because I think that like David Lynch, who was an inspiration to David Chase, not every weird thing has an intrinsic meaning. Sometimes it's just weird to give you a dream, like a sense of it being a dream. But I thought more so than the dream itself, the ending where Tony wakes up, calls Carmela, and it's like, again, when things are at their worst, he turns to her and she turns to him. Like last episode when she was having a little fight with, not a fight, but she runs into Wegler and has an awkward moment. She says, I'm getting back together with my husband, because at the end of the day, when things are bad, they turn to each other. And I thought that was a very sweet and loving moment.
I agree. It's like they're each other's home in a way.
And this dream was all about Tony, one, realizing that he needs to, deal with Tony Blundetto, but two, realizing he wants to come home. He wants to come back to Carmela, like he's ready to leave this behind and go back home where he belongs. So yeah, I thought it was a very strong episode. That love or hate the dream sequences, I thought the actual character revelations were very strong.
Yeah.
Long-term parking, the next episode here. Now, this is one that everyone absolutely loves. One of the strongest plot episodes of the show, and just very, very traumatic, the stuff that we deal with here.
There's so much to say, but yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful performance. I happen to think that the moment when Adriana tells Christopher is like, the hardest one for me to watch in terms of how he initially reacts. Like, I think even harder than, still actually, although, they do us a favor and they don't show her being shot. So that probably helps. But just, yeah, everything comes crashing down and she has no choice.
This one's hard for me too, because I love Adriana so much. What hurts me more than anything else is that tease they do where it looks like she's driving to California for a second, and in your heart it's not the case, but it's almost like, yes, please get away, like just leave this all behind, like you should have been doing this whole time, but it's too late now, and it's almost like it's kicking you in the balls with the sense of like you got a glimpse of what could have been, but unfortunately it's not the case, and it's not going to happen for any of these
Yeah, that's
characters.
interesting. I also feel like there's some parallels in season 5 between Adriana and Meadows' story. Because I think back to unidentified blackmails and Meadows like, you got out the suitcase, and I think of Adriana sitting in the car driving with her suitcase, and sort of Meadow ends up actually going to California for a little bit the following season, but the suitcase thing always to me felt like a symbol of being able, this ability to move, to be free, which Finn was able to do because, like he said, I could just pack up and leave whenever I want. And so I feel like that was something that Adriana wanted, that ability to, pack up her own suitcase, but it was an illusion.
Well, she wanted to leave with Christopher too, and he's gonna have this exact same moment later on where he's like, I should have left, like I should have gone with this woman that loved me instead of sticking with this guy who's going to lead me to hell. And we're gonna see the consequences of Christopher's decision later on, but this is one of those where he could have made a different turn too, but ultimately he chooses to keep going on a path that he's going, and it has consequences.
Very powerful episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly like so good and so discussed that there's honestly nothing to say. It's just
Right, like our words won't do justice.
yeah. I mean, everyone's talked about it a million times, but the final episode, All Due Respect, the 5th season, again, kind of doing that thing where the more shocking thing happens in the penultimate episode, and then we have this one kind of just dealing with the aftermath, which is very interesting. It's almost like long-term parking feels like the finale because of how emotionally traumatic it is. But I sometimes I even forget that, like, oh yeah, there's one after this. So All Due Respect.
Right. Yeah, I think it's I like the snowy element. I always like, for some reason I think back to Robert Frost stopping by Woods on a snowy evening when I think of like Tony running through the snow to get home. Not just on a sort of a side note, but I like, of course, the moment with Tony and Johnny Sack at the end before Johnny gets arrested. But yeah, like you said, it's more, he's sort of settling back in at home. Sort of, yeah, the big climactic event, happened the episode before. And now things are just starting to sort of settle down. Like now Carmela's, just getting the phone call, like, oh, we haven't seen Adriana. What's going on?
Yeah, and Tony obviously coming back home like that references the bear from the. What do you think the bear actually means? Because it's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, he's obviously meant to parallel the bear, but what do you kind of think that symbolism is meant to convey?
I think it's more, in terms of this territorial, aspect, the fact that even after they, were separated, he appears and then he reappears. There's even, I remember in All Happy Families, there's this one scene where Carmel's in the kitchen and he sort of just walks in slowly, like from the back, and you can see the shadow and it's like towering. So I feel like, that along with, he'll randomly show up and be in the pool. There's also the other moment, I think it's in Unidentified Black Males, where the bear shows up again. I think it's, yeah, a lot of it's sort of him, wanting to establish his dominance, the fact that this, this territory he sees as still his. And I think that when they make the references to, though this is a level 2 or a category, whatever, in terms of level of danger, and also about not using firearms in the bureau, I think a lot of that is sort of like references to stuff that Tony does in terms of, oh, Tony and these guys are dangerous, and like this is the stuff that they do. Like, who is the real predator?
I think that comparison to the bear is very apt. It's like he's this dangerous animal that's like destroying everything around them, clumsy. Like there's just a lot of like parallels there with being this kind of animal that, yeah, him returning home. One, it's a happy thing, like, oh, okay, the families came back together, but as we'll see, it's like it's not as it's not as pleasant as it could be because, yeah, there's like this beast in the house now that's going to continue to have destruction with all of their lives. So yeah, it's a very interesting connection there. And then of course Tony killing Tony Blundetto, putting him down himself. One can be looked at as a very like caring thing, like he didn't want him to be tortured like that. But it's also again another example of Tony killing and destroying family members. Like he just kind of destroys everyone who's close to him. And did Tony Blundetto have it coming in some ways? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not just this example. There's Pussy, there's going to be Christopher. There's just so many examples of him taking out the people all around.
Right. And it's also something that leads to, it's one of the things that Phil continues to have resentment over, which we see comes back in season 6, your brother Billy, whatever happened there, since he wasn't able to actually do it himself. It was something that continued to sort of gnaw at him, which of course then eventually, becomes no more Butchie, no more of this. And part of this was this whole Tony B thing.
Yeah, Phil's storyline really doesn't like culminate this season. It's only part of his storyline. Like it's the full story across the 6 seasons or the 2 seasons here. So yeah, that's why I said season 5 is sort of setting up a lot of stuff that's really going to pay off next season. Like some stuff with like Adriana pays off, but next season is when a lot of the threads that were set up in this 5th season finally culminate, which I think it's funny that David Chase originally was going to end the series here in season 5, which I would not be satisfied with. Like again, no, not even like trying to take out season 6 out of my mind. If this was all we got, I would be like, well, what was the point of Phil? What was the point of Christopher stuff? It's like the storylines are not finished yet. They're clearly not done, and it would not have been, this would not have been a satisfying series finale for me.
No, no, I mean, like even the stuff with Vito, what's going to happen with him and Marie, like all of this, there's a lot, or even is Carmela going to find out about Adriana somehow? There's a lot. I wouldn't have been either.
I'm glad we live in a timeline where David Chase decided to keep working on it instead of ending it. Because then otherwise, Sopranos would just be this like, oh, yeah, there was this good HBO show back in the day called The Sopranos, but people don't really talk about it anymore. It's like we needed that final season 6A and 6B, which we're going to talk about those seasons separately. So we have 2 more episodes after this. But yeah, we definitely needed those to finish this story in a satisfying way.
We needed to get our season 6 opening montage.
Yes, we needed that, and we were going to talk about that next episode. So thank you guys all for listening to this, and stay tuned for the next episode coming up here.
Thanks so much.